There's often a big difference between where we're seen and where our hearts are. Utisha Renix was 6 months pregnant working at her job at a local coffee shop. One day when she was on the job, she just collapsed in the middle of the restaurant. But fortunately for her, that day in the restaurant, eating lunch, were 2 local EMT workers. And they would know what to do, and their hands were able to act. So everyone expected a good result that day because of those people in the restaurant, yet it was the opposite reality that would become true. Because while they were seen there, and while their hands were able to act, hey, they were on their lunch break. And all their hands wanted to do was get lunch and go. And that's what they did. The only help they gave was telling Utisha's fellow employees to call 911 as they were walking out the door. See, they were seen where they were needed, but their hearts weren't there. Later on, Utisha would actually pass away in the hospital, as did that 6-month unborn child. There's a big difference between being seen in a certain place and actually having the heart to make a change and be responsible. I mean, they were in uniform. They identified a certain way. And they were called to help, to see, to bring, to experience a much better result. It looked like they were devoted. But when their hearts aren't devoted, we have a big problem. That's always a big problem. Now, I read a story like that, I tell a story like that, and we get pretty upset, don't we? Who would do that? I mean, what kind of person has that kind of ability, but their heart's not there? What's wrong with someone's heart? What's wrong with them? Who does that? Who does that? I do sometimes. No, not as a local EMT worker, but yeah, as a follower of Christ, I do that sometimes. See, there's places God desires to see me. There's directions He wants me to go. There's things He wants me to do to see a good end, a good result, but I miss it. And I miss it because everything might be in the right place, but my heart's not. I miss the good end, that good result, because I might look devoted. I might even say that I am, but my heart's not. I got a big problem. Devotion is what's been lost. Today, we have a devotion problem. Devotion's been lost. I mean, in relationships, in responsibilities, devotion to God who holds all those things together. See, there's a big difference between where God sees us and where our hearts are. As the church, we have to be careful that doesn't become the theme of our song. Those people all over the world today that just went to church. They're either there or they're going to church. And so many people who look devoted, who seem to be saying they're faith-filled, they're going to church, but it's no different for them than going to the movies. They want to be entertained. They want to experience something, maybe feel a moment or tap their foot to some music. They want quick fixes and easy answers. They want the comfort of Easy Street. Their motto, show me something short and sweet. Just be short and sweet. Don't ask too much. It's devotion that's been lost. And when devotion is lost, so is all the good things God desires and wants to accomplish through us. There's often a big, big difference between where God sees us and where our hearts are. Is your heart really devoted to God for that good? Is your heart really devoted to God for the good? Well, maybe just like me, we're in that place where we just need to be reminded of some things. Maybe it's devotion that's been lost. And it's devotion that we need to reconsider. Let's turn in our Bibles to Genesis chapter 42. Now, we're in a series in the book of Genesis. We've been there since January, and we're nearing the end. Okay, we're almost at the end of this. And we're going to cover almost 4 chapters today, but don't get too afraid about that, okay? I know people get really afraid when they hear the pastor's going to preach on 4 chapters. It's going to be okay, everybody, all right? Let's be devoted enough to get through this, okay? All right, let's stand together and read Genesis chapter 42, just the first 5 verses together, and then we'll continue on from that. Genesis chapter 42, verse 1. This is God's word to us today. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others, because he was afraid that harm might come to him. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for there was famine in the land of Canaan also. God, today, I thank you for our time together, and it's just good to be here with our Bibles open on our laps to hear what you want to say to us today. And God, may we be 2 things. We always pray for this. May we be encouraged by your word, and may we also be challenged. Because we know as followers of you, we're still growing up. Okay? Our faith muscle is still getting bigger every day, and there's things for us to learn and consider and to be challenged with. So may we be those 2 things this morning, encouraged and challenged by things today that we need to be encouraged and challenged with today. And so open our eyes to the things that we need to hear, we need to take in, and we need to understand further in our life of faith and our devotion to you. And I pray these things in your name. Amen. Please be seated. Well, there's often a big difference between where God sees us and where our hearts are. Because there's a big difference between hunger pangs and spiritual ones. There's a big difference between your stomach being empty and your heart being. There's a big difference. And when we meet these brothers this morning in chapter 42, they're hungry. They're feeling those hunger pangs. They're hungry because there's famine in the land. And the famine that began in Egypt, it just spread out, and now it's in Canaan. So they're feeling that physical hunger. They know their stomachs are empty. But it's their spiritual emptiness that's the real issue. See, there is no godly sustenance in their heart towards God. Look at verse 4. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others, because he was afraid that harm might come to him. See, years before this, and we've heard this story, years before, those same brothers sold Joseph into slavery for a few bucks, right? And then they went home and they lied to their dad about that. Okay, these are these same brothers. And you might say, well, that's years ago, though. That's years ago. Yeah, it was years ago. We understand that. And we also understand that maybe Jacob didn't know that he was lied to by his other sons. But he knows something. He knows that he still doesn't trust his sons with his other son, Benjamin. See, I wonder sometimes maybe if he did wonder. He knows something about his sons. He knows their heart is empty. Their hearts are empty because all they can think about is that their stomachs are. And yet God can use physical needs at times to point to us and point out to us those much deeper spiritual needs. God can do that. Have you ever noticed that? That sometimes God can use a physical problem, like something physical in someone's life, to point to them and point out to them their much deeper spiritual needs before Him. Maybe that their hearts aren't right with Him. A number of years ago, I was at a session with a really well-known Christian author and speaker, and he was talking about his itinerary and where he had to fly, and how when he flew, because he flew a lot from city to city, he was always afraid of who was going to sit in the seat next to him. And he was afraid because he traveled alone. And when you travel alone, you have no say as to who's going to sit next to you. And so his worst fear was always, am I going to get someone that's just going to drive me crazy through the flight? Maybe he wants to sleep or do some work on the next talk. But that was the fear. And so he jumps on the plane, he gets on his seat. No one's there yet when a man sits next to him. And he can't sit still. He just can't sit still. I mean, he's jittery, he's moving around, he's bumping into him, he's starting to sweat. When all of a sudden, it seemed like his worst fears are coming true. Look at who he's got. Look who his neighbor is. When all of a sudden, this man sitting next to him in the seat threw his hands up in the air and says, I need God. He was physically terrified of flying. That's why he was jittery and sweating and couldn't sit still. But in that physical need, he really understood what he really did need. And God does that. See, we've seen the one physically hungry, throw their hands up in the air and say, I need God in this. And we've seen those physically in danger throw their hands up and say, I need God. And we've seen those who are physically suffering in some way just throw their hands up and say, I need God. See, there are those times when God will use a physical need to point to him by pointing out to people that their hearts aren't right. Yet. Is your heart devoted to God for good? Is it those spiritual needs that are at the top of your list? Because there's a big, big difference between hunger pangs and spiritual ones. But God had a good plan for these brothers. He had a good plan. And he wanted to move them to that good place and bring that good result. But he can't do that unless their hearts are there. And so as much as God saw them there, he needed to see their hearts there. It's a heart that's devoted to God is a heart that's directed by God for that good. Their hearts weren't there yet. And so God needed to test their heart. Verse 6 of chapter 42. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who had sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. But he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Where do you come from? He asked. From the land of Canaan, they replied, to buy food. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, you are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected. No, my lord, they answered. Your servants have come to buy food. There's often a big difference between where God sees us and where our hearts are. Because there's also a really big difference between words and action. Big difference between words and action. Now, in verse 9, we see that Joseph is reminded of what? A dream. Remember the dream he had like years ago? The dream that what? The dream that God used to tell Joseph what his plan was. And the plan was a good plan. And the plan was that Joseph would eventually rule over his brothers for good. Okay, that was a good plan. But were the brothers ready for that? See, were their hearts really ready for what that plan looked like? Well, Joseph's not sure. Joseph's not sure. And so the tests continue. Joseph has serious doubt, and he's got good reason for that doubt. And so verse 7 says that he's harsh on them. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. He was hard on them. And what is it that Joseph says? How is Joseph so hard on these brothers? Well, he accuses them. He says, "You're spies. That's why you're here. You're spies." And 4 times in the story, Joseph accuses his brothers of being spies. Now, I can call your bluff. I know exactly what kind of heart you have. You're just spies. So how do the brothers respond to that? How do they respond to that accusation? How do they get out of this pickle? Verse 11. "We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." Oh, you're honest. Honest like the time you lied to your dad about what happened to your brother? Like that kind of honest? Honest. That's what they've said with their words. Verse 13, "But they replied, after one more accusation, 'Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more.'" Well, what do you know? They actually said something honest. Okay, that was honest. That was the truth. They said the truth. They were honest to Joseph. They said they would be, and they said something honest. All right. Okay, you've said you're honest, and you've said some honest things. Prove it. Prove it. Verse 14. Joseph said to them, "It is just as I told you, you're spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your numbers to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you're telling the truth. If you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." And he put them all in custody for 3 days. You know what Joseph knows? Joseph knows talk is cheap. Show me. Show me. Show me that what you say about yourself is true. Show me that. Show me. Because if your heart's in the right place, then things are going to move in the right direction. But show me. Show me that. Talk is cheap. Show me. You know, how many times do we have these kind of conversations with people? And they're saying all the right things. Maybe we're saying all the right things when they're talking to us. We're saying all the right things. Oh yeah, it's good. And you say the right things, and I'm good, and my heart's good. My heart's good. Everything's good. Everything's going to go good. And in your mind, you just are begging them, show me something then. Show me something. Show me something that communicates that more than your lips flapping. Show me that. Show me that your heart has changed. Show me something. And when Joseph says, "Show me," he gives them 3 days to think about it. Because now they're in jail for 3 days. And that jail is really, as much as it's a very physical jail, it is a physical jail. It really is a phenomenal picture, an incredible picture of their heart condition before God. They're in bondage to their own sin. That's the visual. They have been in bondage to that for years and years and years. And so Joseph is testing them by thinking this. Hey, are they going to do anything for anyone else but themselves? Are they going to actually do something for somebody else, not themselves? See, that's going to test anybody's heart. That will test a heart. Show me something then. Show me. Okay? Talk is cheap. Show me. And so many times we just find ourselves begging someone, maybe in our minds or maybe even out loud, okay, show me then. Show me your heart has changed. Show me this. And this morning, God might be telling us the same thing. Okay, look it. You're saying all the right things, and you appear to be devoted with what you're saying. Show me then. Show me something. Show me. You got to prove that to those that are around you. Show me that. Show them that. And often to get out of these traps we're in and to get out these jail cells that we are in bondage to, it takes action. It takes action to get to that good result. And so this morning, God might be telling some of us just the same thing. Show me. Just show me. Show me. Now, the message of the Bible is pretty clear. We are in bondage to sin. That's who we are. But through Christ and faith in Him, we have freedom. That's what faith does. And we talk about our faith a lot. I have faith. In Ephesians 2, verse 1 and 5, it says, "And you were once dead in your transgressions and sins that you used to live in, when you followed the way of the world and the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit of the one who is at work in those who are disobedient. We were also at one time like them, gratifying the desires of the flesh, following its desires and its thoughts. We were like the rest of them, deserving of wrath, but because of His great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive in Christ. Even when we were dead in our transgressions, it is by grace you have been saved." And in verse 8, Paul adds a tag to that. It is by grace you have been saved by faith. And we talk about having faith. I'm a person of faith, and we say that. I'm a person of faith. And yet it's more than words. There's nothing anywhere in the Bible that teaches us. We just say something, like we say some prayer, and then we're a faith-filled person. Nowhere in the Bible does it tell us that. In fact, the Bible says this: show me. If you are a person of faith, you will be a person who acts your faith. There's action to faith. And that's what James says. He says, one person says, I have faith, you have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you faith with deeds. And he says, you foolish people, don't you know that faith without deeds is useless? In chapter 2, verse 26, he goes one step further than that. It's not just useless. He says, faith without deeds is dead. Show me. God is saying, show me, show me, show me. You can't just talk about this anymore. It's not just a prayer you say. It isn't just saying the right things and sounding right. You got to show me, show me, show me, show me. Where's the action there? See, are you really devoted to God for good? Are you acting your faith? Are you showing people who you are? Because there's a big difference between words and action. And God saw these brothers. He had a good plan for them. He saw them in a good place with good results. But to get them there, their hearts needed to be. Because a heart devoted to God is one directed by Him for that good. And so the tests will continue. They're not there yet. They're not there yet. In the next section, verses 18 down to 28. Let's just read that part. On the third day, Joseph said to them, do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, okay, if you're not just saying this to sound good, let one of your brothers stay here in prison while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified, and that you may not die. Okay, this is serious. This they proceeded to do. They said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us. Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. They did not realize that Joseph could understand them, since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and began to weep, but then came back and spoke to them. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. And Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain on their donkey and left. At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw the silver in the mouth of his sack. My silver has been returned, he said to his brothers. Here it is in my sack. Their hearts sank, and they turned to each other, trembling. Listen to what they say. What is this God has done to us? See, there's often a big difference between where God sees us, where God desires us to be, and where our hearts are. Because there's a big difference between people testing you and God testing you. Joseph takes Simeon. Okay, that's who he keeps. And that's part of the story that looks as though man is testing. It looks like man is putting his brothers to the test. And why wouldn't he do that? I mean, are they going to treat Simeon the same way they treated me? That's probably his question. Are they just going to let him here rot in jail for a little bit of cash, for some crop? That's what they did to me. Is that what they're going to do? And so it might seem as though Joseph is testing the brothers. But we're wrong. It's not Joseph testing. It's God's test. This is God's test. And so often we get it wrong right from our first step because we think people are testing us. I mean, who does that? We think people are testing us. Oh, that husband of mine, always testing me. It's all he does. Just test me, test, all the time, that husband of mine. Oh, that fill in the blank person, always testing me. And we point to the person and we think the person is testing us. Well, you know what? God allowed that person in your life. And at one point, you might even have thought the person was a gift. It might just be that God is using that situation to test you. God is testing you because he wants to know how your heart is. He wants to know how your heart is. And much is revealed in those tests. For these brothers, they understand in this test that their hearts aren't right. There is a problem. And the problem is with God first and foremost. Verse 21, they said to one another, surely you are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but he would not listen. That's why this distress has come on to us. They recognize what the issue is. Okay? They know the issue. And they're feeling that in the depths of their heart. In the depth of their heart, they know their hearts aren't right with God. That there's sin in their heart. And that the test came from God. Verse 22, Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to, what's the word he uses? Sin against the boy? That's the heart issue that they're being made very well aware of. And then so verse 28, they actually ask the question, what is this that God has done. It wasn't Joseph testing. God was testing their hearts, because only God can change a heart. Only God can convict a heart. Only God can change a heart and turn that heart in his direction. And with these brothers, he had to do some work on their heart. And he did. He just happened to use Joseph to do it. See, is your heart devoted to God for good? See, are there actually issues between you and God that you need to deal with? That maybe God is using a situation or circumstance in your life to test that and to reveal that to you. Because there's a big, big difference between people testing you and God testing you. Because God's had a good plan. He saw these brothers in this good place with good results, but to get there, their hearts needed to be. Because a heart devoted to God is one directed by God for good. And so we get these tests of devotion. And now the brothers have the hardest test of all. I mean, it's just ramping up to this one. Because now the test is who? Benjamin. Now it's Benjamin. Joseph had to see Benjamin. Jacob was not going to let him go. Would their hearts prove to be devoted enough to see the good result? Well, from verse 29 all the way over to chapter 45, verse 8, we see the Benjamin test. We see the Benjamin test. And in the Benjamin test, we learn this. There's often a big difference between where God sees us and where our hearts are. Because there's a big difference between God's sovereignty and people's responsibility. There's a big difference. See, all we're seeing in this section is God's sovereign, good plan being fulfilled. It's the plan. And God's accomplishing his plan. And we see that through this section. In chapter 42, verse 9, remember that Joseph says he remembered his dreams. And what was the dream? The dream was the plan, the good result, where God was going to bring this family. And in fact, I think we should just go back there and read the dream so we understand what the dream was. In chapter 37, verse 5 to 10, we hear the dream. Two dreams. Flip back a couple pages and let's just read these dreams. Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream. And this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" That was the plan. Okay, God used the dream to very clearly give him the plan. And Joseph remembers the dream. And why does he remember the dream? Because in 42, verse 6, so when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. And they would do it again. In chapter 43, verse 28, They replied, "Your servant, our father, is still alive and well." And they bowed down, prostrating themselves before him. It's the plan. It's the good plan. It's happening right before his eyes. All that's happening is God's sovereign good plan. In fact, Joseph's servant knew it. In chapter 43, verse 23, he says, "It's all right," he said, "don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks." God did something. This is just God's sovereign good plan. In chapter 43, verse 33, when they're having this great meal together, something astonishes the brothers. It says they were astonished. Well, what astonishes them? They're sitting in order of age. Well, how does that happen? How does this man know their ages? All that's happening is God's sovereign good plan. In Job 42, verse 2, Job says, "I know you can do all things, and your purpose will never be thwarted." God's going to do it. God can do all things, and his plan is going to be fulfilled. In Psalm 135, verse 6, God, the Lord, does everything he pleases in heaven, on earth, in the seas, and in the depths of the seas. All that is happening here is God's sovereign good plan. It's a good plan. See, God had a good plan for them. He saw them in this good place with this great, glorious result. And God has a plan for us. God's going to move us to these good ends, these good results, if our hearts are ready. And for the brothers, were their hearts really ready for this? Because as much as God is sovereign, there is still people's responsibility. And there's a big difference. I'm almost done. In chapter 42, verse 37, this is kind of funny, actually. Bring Benjamin. Right? They're responsible for this now. Bring Benjamin. And this is what Reuben says. Reuben said to his father, "You may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back." Well, that's easy. Let someone else be responsible for that. So if I mess up, my sons will pay for that. Well, that's pretty easy. That's not being personally responsible. But then there's Judah. Judah. And if you were to read the section on Joseph's story and just follow Judah's life, you would see that his heart is moving and shifting in God's direction. So in chapter 43, verse 8 and 9, Judah says something very different. Then Judah said to Israel, his father, "Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life." Judah is saying, I will be responsible. I know there's things to do, and I will be responsible for that. But again, it's easy to say that. It's easy to say that. What happens when the heat gets turned up and issues come? Is he still going to hold to his word? He was tested in that one other time. In chapter 44, we see the worst case scenario happen in the lives of these men. Benjamin comes with them. Everything is going well. They're getting food. They get on their way, and then Joseph does what? He leaves a silver cup in Benjamin's sack. And then the soldiers rush, find the sack, which means what? Which means Benjamin's caught. This is the worst case scenario for them. Benjamin's caught. Now he has to come back and pay the price for that. So is Judah Is his heart really devoted? Is he really going to bear that responsibility? Chapter 44, verse 16. What can we say to my Lord? Judah replied. What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. There's recognition again of heart issue. We are now my Lord's slaves, we ourselves, and the one who was found to have the cup. But Joseph said, far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who was found to have the cup will become my slave. Okay, just Benjamin. The rest of you go back to your father in peace. Then Judah went up to him and said, here's the moment. Pardon your servant, my Lord. Let me speak a word to my Lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself. My Lord asked his servants, do you have a father or a brother? And we answered, we have an aged father, and there is a young son born to him in his old age. His brother is dead, and he is the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me so I can see him for myself. Okay, there's the test. And we said to my Lord, the boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves him, he will die. But you told your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again. When we went back to your servant, my father, we told him what my Lord had said. Then our father said, go back and buy a little more food. But we said, we can't go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us will we go. We cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them went away from me, and I said, he has surely been torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in misery. So now if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow. Your servants guaranteed the boy's safety to my father, I said. If I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. Now then, please, let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy. And let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried. He cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. Judah takes personal responsibility. He proved that his heart was in the right place. And because his heart was in the right place, God could finally move them into that good place God had desired. Is your heart devoted to God for good? Are you taking personal responsibility for things that God has given you responsibility over? Are you really doing that? Because there's a big difference between God's sovereignty and your part in that personal responsibility. God saw these men in a good place. It was a good plan, a good place, with a good result. But they couldn't get there until their hearts were. And finally they were. Because a heart devoted to God is one directed by him for that good. Do you want to see good? Do you want to see that good end, that good result? And those good ends, those good results aren't shallow surface things. Those things aren't things that just let us live life. Those are the things that give life. And that's a big difference. They give life. Those are the things. Don't you want to see that kind of good? Where God is working, where people are being cared for and loved, where people are coming to know Christ and growing in their faith. Don't you want to see God move like that? Well, just being entertained is not going to do that. And just looking for an experience, let me feel something in a moment, or tap my feet to some music, is not going to do that. Neither will quick fixes and easy answers. And neither will the comfort of Easy Street or the motto, just let's keep it short and sweet. Don't ask too much. That will not do it. What will do it is a heart devoted to God. One whose spiritual needs are at the top of the list. One who acts and knows what God has called them to do. One who knows God might use people to test you, to stir things up and make you aware of things that aren't right. And one that, although God has a sovereign good plan, knows they have responsibility. There's a big difference in that. And there's also a really big difference between hearing the pastor preach for 40 minutes and actually living it out. God, today we come to you and we once again just thank you for the story of Joseph. It's just so good, this narrative. And the story that you gave us to just teach us things about ourselves as we learn things about you. Are we devoted? Really? Is our heart really in that good place where we can see your good ends, your good results, those life-giving things in people and in us? Really? Are we really? Well, God, I can only answer the question for myself. And there are times I miss it. I miss it. Because everything's in the right place but my heart. I miss those good ends because my heart is really not devoted. I miss it. And I miss those good things you promised to do. Those life-giving things in me and others. God, I can only answer my own question for myself. And my church family can only answer that question for themselves. Are we really devoted to you? Really, really devoted to you? And if not, what are we missing? What are we missing because of that? What things could you be doing, but you can't because our hearts aren't there yet? What are we missing? God, our prayer today is that you would just show us the real condition of our heart. Is there a problem? Is devotion lost? Because when devotion is lost, so many other things are too. God, may we today just give our hearts back to you. Understand what you're calling us to and devote ourselves to you and just watch you move in ways only you can. To change hearts and to move people according to your plan, to let them be revealed, your promises revealed, and your purposes celebrated. And I pray that today, that our hearts are good so that we can see yours. And I pray this in your name, the name of Jesus. Amen.